This podcast is a collaboration between Costard and Touchstone Productions and the Dads from the Crypt podcast.
You know, this thing doesn't look like a treasure chest, huh? Looks more like a casket.
Right again, amigo. And inside it is the most incredible treasure in the whole world. Cut the straps!
Come on. Open it up. What the fuck?
Boys, meet Lilith.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the How Not to Make a Movie podcast. I'm Alan Katz.
And I'm Gil Adler.
Now, before we get rolling, as usual, we're going to urge you, if you're enjoying what we do, and gosh, we hope you're enjoying it, please subscribe and hit the like button below us. It helps so much. Today, our guest is a guy named Chris Boardman. Chris is a composer, films and TV, but also general music. He also is one of the greatest orchestrators in all of Hollywood history. He is known in Hollywood as one of a handful of musicians who can literally write anything.
Worked with Quincy Jones, worked with Dick Donner, Lethal Weapon,
And then,
on and on.
And then Bordello of Blood.
Oh, right. I forgot about that one.
But, you know, it's funny. Chris's work on, well, as you and Chris will describe in the conversation, your work with Chris on just doing the music for Bordello was one of the few pleasant experiences of making that movie.
It was. And without further ado, let's bring on Chris.
You, Chris, are known in Hollywood as one of a handful of musicians who can write literally anything.
Well, so some people say.
It is wherever, you know, as I was doing the research, what can I find out about Chris that I don't already know? And that comes around a lot, that you are just so bloody versatile. How the hell did that happen?
Well, you know, to condense a longer story, my goal was not necessarily to be singularly focused, but just to stay busy. And so I've never really considered, silos as being applicable. So it's just a matter of if an opportunity came along and I thought, oh, I think I can do that. I would go do it and just apply what I brought to the table to that different environment, without regard to, you know, it's like the kids today to talk about imposter syndrome and all that, lack of self-confidence. You know, just throw me in. If I can make it work, great. If it doesn't work, and I move on to the next.
You don't mind swimming in the deep end?
No, it's my addictive personality tendencies is to live in a constant adrenaline rush, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So,
well, hey, no, I think, you know, we understand completely. Deadline pressure, is very appealing. It's not an unattractive thing. No,
I'm a big fan of deadlines.
Oh, yeah. No, it's wonderful. Yeah, otherwise we would all dither endlessly. Nothing would ever get finished.
Yeah, you know, and one of the things I'm most proud of is in all these years, I've never missed a deadline. So you end up early on. It was so expensive to record scores and to record musicians that if you know, missing a deadline was tantamount to ending your career.
Sure.
So I just learned early on to develop that muscle and figure out how to get the job done.
We sort of had the same reaction to writing. You know, we had the same deadline. If you didn't have the deadline, what are we going to shoot? And then,
when you're trying to even just write a joke, you could tinker with it endlessly, looking for just the right word. And and really it depends upon how you want to play it as to what the right word is really going to be. It's, well, we'll get to all of that. Over the course of an incredible career, you've been a successful composer for movies, an Emmy-winning arranger for TV. You've orchestrated major Hollywood films. You've been musical director for, we'll explore all the top acts that you worked with. I mean, amazing. Who haven't you worked with? And then there was Wishful Thinking, the band you co-founded with Tim Weston, Dave Garibaldi, and Dave Shank. Not just a good band, a great band. You come from Glendale. My question is, did Glendale instill all that in you?
No, it's I tell my spiritual friends that the hand of God has been on my shoulder all my life.
Cool.
And if someone once described me and says, you didn't choose music, music chose you. So it's just such a huge part of my being engaged in making music and or being creative, that I can't stop it. I've tried many times and failed. I decided to just go with it.
You emerged from the womb with music being the center of your...
a story I tell in a memoir that I wrote a couple of years ago is I was 3 years old and my brother was 5. He had chronic tonsillitis. And my parents, came from an engineering household, and my parents decided to do a twofer and have my tonsils out, even though my tonsils were fine, right? And the surgeon came back and he told my parents that my adenoids were growing abnormally into my inner ear. And had they not had the tonsils removed, I would have been totally deaf by the time I was 6 or 7 years old.
Oh, you got lucky.
And then 6 months later, my parents asked me what I wanted for my birthday. I'm 4. And I told them I wanted a piano. And there was no music in the household. And they rented a piano, and I started plunking out melodies by ear the day the piano arrived. The teacher came out to the house a couple of times and said, got frustrated and said, he can't even read yet. There's no reason for you to give him lessons because he has no idea what the music says. So that was kind of how this all started. Like I say, it's just a huge part of my being that I can't necessarily control.
You bonded with that piano.
Yeah. Piano's my oldest friend.
Mm-hmm.
It's non-judgmental. I get back whatever I put into it,
Can you recall in any way the first time how old are you? You said 3 or 5 year old fingers touched the keys?
No, but I do have a photo here. I'll try and pull it up if you ask another question of me that my mom sent me later in her life at the piano. See,
I had a friend growing up who had that same prodigy-like talent. He just, it's something about the piano and his fingers. They just went together like peanut butter and jelly.
Well, for me, it's music has never been a mystery. It just hasn't been. So I can't seem to find this picture.
You see, now to me, I'm a person with absolutely no musical talent whatsoever. I can carry a tune mostly,
right?
But that's about it. Otherwise, it is a complete mystery to me. I tried for a little while. I tried to teach myself the ukulele. I thought, surely, surely. No. I literally, the chords I could not remember from one moment to the next, and the choreography of my fingers on the frets was just I couldn't remember it. It didn't. To someone with musical ability, there's a physical. It must have some physical presence in your head that you simply, I don't know. It's just vapor in my head.
Well, there's a propensity to it's in the brain. For the last 6 months, I've been developing this mental health self-care method and done a lot of research on neuroscience. And it's the way that the auditory cortex works. Some people have a propensity to be able to memorize pitches and be able to make that connection. if for some reason that part of your auditory complexes or cortex is not developed in that way, then there would be a gap. It would be much more difficult. And at that point it becomes a mechanical intellectual exercise as opposed to an intrinsic organic sort of expression.
I wish I had an iota of this understanding. I appreciate it so much in the abstract, and it really is. I'm blown away. Yeah, I'm. If I could have a talent other than the one I have, it would be yours. Yours specifically.
Well, you're probably better off than me.
It's
hard to make a living these days as a musician. So you have to have no other.
It's really
choice.
easy as a writer. It's simple. All right. So let me ask the question this way. If you could see your childhood in musical terms, is there a particular musical genre that leaps out at you?
You know, I've been a devoted fan of Chopin since I was a boy. I started playing Chopin waltzes when I was about 7 years old, and for some reason that just clicked. That feels like home to me. So,
why do you think that is?
I have no idea. I can't articulate it.
I mean, Chopin, yeah, because that's a lot of finger work.
Yeah, it's challenging literature. It can be. Some pieces are more challenging than others. But there's just something about it that I feel attached to or close to, connected to.
Is there a particular piece that it epitomizes?
It varies. Well, it varies from time to time. I'm very fond of the Chopin ballades. They're very challenging pieces of music. I can't really play them for anybody at this point, but I enjoy slogging my way through only because it's challenging.
Sure.
The Chopin waltzes have always been a favorite. And that there's quite a story about that. When I was about 10 years old, 9 or 10 years old, I had been taking piano lessons from a lady up the street. And she came to my parents and said, he's beyond me. There's nothing more that I can teach him. And at the time I was working on this Chopin waltz, this big 15-minute piece. And she had the stroke of genius to tell me Arthur Rubinstein had just released a recording of all the Chopin waltzes. And she told my parents, go buy this record, and then he can practice by playing along with the record. So I'm like 10 years old, and the record player was in the other room, and I'd hit play, and the record would drop, and I'd race over to the piano, and then I would play along with Rubinstein as a way of learning how to play this piece. So that, like I said, started like age 9 or 10, and I guess that's a reason why I feel so connected to it.
Were there, considering that you ended up in the movies and TV, was that particularly interesting to you when you were an evolving young musical? Oh,
you mean as a potential career or something to do?
Did it? None of us ever, I think, expects to land in this world. But was there something attractive about it? I mean, I always knew, I think from the first, I look at, I think I was at a birthday party. I was 6 years old, and the dad played an 8mm
home movie, yeah,
of Laurel and Hardy's Big Business. And it's, they play Christmas tree salesman in Southern California. It's hilarious. And at the end, they destroy James Finlayson's house while he destroys their truck. But at 6 years old, I saw that movie and I felt like I understood comedy. And
Good for you.
I wanted to emulate what they did. It wasn't that formulated, but something in me, I've never forgotten that movie. It's like I saw the stars lining up and I just understood something. And damn if that didn't influence my path.
Sure.
Okay. All right. So
to answer your question,
anything like that happened to you?
Well, I started performing in rock and roll bands when I was 14.
Okay, cool.
Prior to that, I'm sorry.
Yeah, and what kind of bands were you?
We were just cover bands. It was 1968, so
okay.
We played the Doors and Grassroots and all those kinds of bands. It's like high school dances. That kind of thing.
Sure.
I've always been very visually oriented, and I love stories. I'm really about storytelling. So when I got into high school, with all my classical training, these rock and roll bands were not that challenging. It was way beneath what my musical capabilities were. But I got interested in jazz. And so how do you do that? And so I tried to figure out what jazz was all about, living in Ogden, Utah, of all places. And then when I started writing for the junior college stage band, the thought occurred to me that movies that sounds like a fun thing to do, having no idea what was actually entailed. Yeah. But I said, but that's kind of when it started, when I was about 17, 18 years old.
All right. So the hook was kind of set that was music and visuals. Yeah. How then it's a matter of finding your way into that world.
Yeah.
All right. How'd you find your way into this world?
Well, I kind of exhausted opportunities in Utah. My family moved from LA to Ogden when I was 13 because of my dad's job. And by the time I was in junior college, I was working consistently as a piano player, like 3-4 nights a week, making money hand over fist, living at home. Going to junior college, I had no interest in academics. It was just an opportunity for me to do music full time. And I was walking down the hallway and I saw this flyer on the board and it said Famous Arrangers Clinic in Las Vegas. And it listed all of these names. And the only name that I recognized was Quincy Jones. And mind you, this is 1972. And so my dad was a pretty forward thinker, and he said, sure, you should go. So I went to Las Vegas and I met a guy named Billy Byers, and he was my instructor. And Billy was an arranger. He was like one of the record date arrangers in New York in the 50s. He did your shows with Sid Caesar and all that cast of brilliant people. I went back and did the workshop the next year, and I started hanging out with him. And mind you, it was like culture shock for me because like my dad had a buzz cut and short sleeve dress shirts and pocket protectors. I mean, he's a pretty cool guy, but nonetheless,
you said he was an engineer.
Yeah, he was a creative mechanically. I'm very proud of him, even though we had a kind of a difficult relationship. He invented a thing called the pulse rocket. You remember Apollo 13? They had a little joystick that they used to steer in space, like the Asteroids, the video game. Mm-hmm. My dad invented that propulsion system.
Wow.
Right. Yeah, it's crazy. It's just, and he never talked about anything. I mean, he was like tight as a drum. He never really talked about him. And when I first met Billy, he was playing trombone with Frank Zappa, 1972, mind you. And he smoked cigarettes like Artie Johnson and had John Lennon little sunglasses, and he had a ponytail with hair down to his waist. And it's like going from the engineer's household to that, it was like, oh my God. So the second year I ended up hanging out with him, and I told him I was planning on going to Cal State Northridge, and he said, give me a call when you get to town, we'll hang out. And it took me a couple of months to get up the courage to call him because I had no idea what to say or how to approach it. I finally called him and ended up going to his house for a Sunday afternoon hang. He would host traveling musicians at a beach house in Malibu. And that kind of evolved into having Sunday dinner with his family for the next 2 years. And so I would drive out, attempt to study and then have dinner with the family. He had kids younger than me. And once the kids went to bed, we put on headphones and he'd play me records. And we'd talk about the records that we were listening to. And that was my education. And through that, after a couple of years, he started throwing me little bones, little assignments to do to kind of work me into the business. So
what were those assignments like?
Oh, one was simply laying out score pages, like putting instrument assignments on staves and that sort of thing.
So the beginnings of the orchestration process.
Yeah. And then the very first, this is a wild story. I hadn't thought about this in a while. One of his clients, he was big in Vegas. At one time he had 60-70% of the arrangements in Vegas were his. Huh. So one of his clients was Joey Heatherton, and he said, Joey Heatherton wants to do Lovin' You by Minnie Riperton with a solo harp. And he says, here's an approach. So he gave me a couple of bars and I said, okay. I went home and I did it and I sent it off. That was my first arrangement for in a professional setting.
Right. So you wrote the harp part.
Yeah, I wrote the harp part based on his direction.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Had you ever played the harp before?
No. But, it's like, I know the orchestra very well. You don't have to actually physically play the instrument to know how to write for it. You just have to understand the physicality of the instrument, what goes into how it works. And then, the mechanical parts of it, which is the range. And then in the case of the harp, there's pedals that change the pitches and all the rest of that.
That is such abstract thinking. I don't want you to, those of us who don't have that capacity,
right.
The abstraction of the thinking to imagine, to write, to create in an instrument that you cannot play, but which your understanding is also abstract.
Johnny Mandel
it blows my mind. It just does. I'm in awe of that kind of talent. I'm sorry to gush.
It's a skill. It is a skill that can be honed.
But you have to have the ability to begin with.
Sure. Yeah. There's in those days, excuse me, there's a phrase called "see with your ears and hear with your eyes," which essentially means if you see a score, notes on a piece of paper, that you can imagine the sound of what you're looking at. And conversely, if you're hearing something, what does it look like on the written page? And so that's the way I was trained, was to hear it on paper. And when, in today's world with mock-ups and synthesizers and all the rest of that, nobody does that anymore. There's no need for it. But in those days, you had like a couple of hours with the band. You didn't have endless rehearsal time. So you had to walk in the door being 100% prepared if you're going to do that kind of a job. And at the time, I had no real way to put Billy's talent and expertise into context because I didn't know anybody else in the business. And so I trusted him implicitly. I figured the way that he would write at the kitchen table after dinner on onion skin, because there's no copying machines. So it was like a they would use an oscillate machine like an architect.
You're
to
like monks.
reproduce.
You're like monks copying out.
Yeah.
Transcripts.
But the thing, he never used a piano, and he would write in ink on onion skin, on vellum. And I didn't know any better. I thought that's the way everybody works. So that's what I learned how to do. And it was a thrilling time. I mean, things happened really quickly.
Your first orchestrating credit is The Wiz in 1978.
For films. I started doing TV prior to that.
Right.
And
there's, what is it? Okay. What was the first TV gig? You got?
The first was a really, I don't even remember the name of it, but it was some late night silly show that was recorded in Reno. And one of Billy's clients was the musical director, and he didn't want to do it. He said, "Here, hire this kid." Well, the musical director turned out to be a guy named Marvin Laird, who wrote a off-Broadway show called Ruthless that won all sorts of Drama Desk awards, and amazingly talented guy. But I think that was 1974. And then the first network show I did as an arranger was a show called Three Girls Three with Debbie Allen, Ellen Foley, and Mimi Kennedy all making their debut.
Wow.
I think that was like 77. And then the year before that, I went on the road, left college, and started working as a musical director for an entertainer named Mitzi Gaynor, which was a dance act. She played the lead in South Pacific.
Yeah. So you're working for Mitzi Gaynor.
Yeah.
Oh,
for a time. Cool. And then I got hired away by Tom Jones. I stayed with Mitzi for a year, and then I left and started working for Tom.
What year were you working for Tom?
1977. So, and I had, Billy and Johnny Mandel were lifelong friends. They met on your shows when they were both 21. And he was aware of me through my relationship with Billy and what I was working on with Billy. And so the Wiz came about. I remember picking up the phone and saying hello, and on the other end of the line it says, "Hey man, it's Quincy."
It's intuitive,
I distinctly remember that phone call. I hang up the phone rings again, and it's Johnny, and he says, "Has Quincy called you yet? I want you to work for me this week." So that's the way that all started.
It's nice to be wanted.
Well, yeah, and to be honest, I was just trying to keep my head above water.
See, I probably would have said Quincy who?
Yeah.
Because it couldn't possibly be.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
You eventually got into composing.
Yeah, I started writing songs when I was about 11 years old. And all these bands that I played with were all original songs in high school. So, and then I started writing big band arrangements in junior college. And it always, it was, like I said, music is no mystery to me. I mean, I think of Paul McCartney's visual metaphor. It's like the melodies are all out there. You just have to go grab one. So because it's like a 24/7 radio going on inside my head. It's just I sit down, I can come up with something. It may not be great, but there's always something there to take advantage of.
Aside from Chopin, what were the musical influences that really?
Bill Evans. Big fan of Bill Evans. It's funny, I have such eclectic taste. When I was in high school, it was the Doors, and I never was into folk that much, but Crosby, Stills, and Nash. I was living in Ogden, Utah, and at the time, Salt Lake City was a stopover between Denver and San Francisco. And so every week there would be a different band filling in a night in their schedule in Salt Lake City. So I got to see Led Zeppelin in their first U.S. tour.
Right place, right time. You were perfect.
And I would go to all of these shows, and I was young. I was like 15 years old. Wow. So I got exposed to all this kind of stuff. My dad was a jazz fan, so he exposed me to Count Basie, to Ellington, and all those folks. And I was just soaking it up, to be honest. So I'm not prejudicial or judgmental about any style of music, because it's like, I remember years ago, I was doing a TV movie, and I had been out of the pop music scene for a while. And the director wanted me to do some Alanis Morissette sound-alikes. And I said, okay, fine. So I bought Jagged Little Pill. And my first reaction was, oh my God, she had sold 10 million records by this point. And said, there must be a lot of really angry women out there. So how can you argue with somebody who sold 10 million records as speaking to a constituency that's either underserved or whatever? I remember there's value to it.
I remember the first time that I heard "You Ought to Know." It was it kind of took my breath away. Just the incredible honesty of it.
Yeah,
some of those lyrics
and the focus. The intensity of
it. Yeah. So absolutely. Well, hey, as we started the conversation, you are known in this town as one of a handful of musicians who can literally write anything. And
that's a double-edged sword, let me tell you.
Oh, well, yes. There was a show you did with Jack Klugman and John Stamos, You Again.
Oh my goodness, I haven't thought about that in a long time.
Yeah, is that your first large TV credit?
I just out of the blue. I try to avoid episodic TV.
Yeah.
But they called me up because I had a reputation as a jazz writer. It's like and so I just wrote a bunch of bumpers and ins and outs in a jazz format for them, and then I just let it go and didn't even think about it again.
Yeah. It was just such, looking at all the stuff you've done. It was, well, that's a strange credit.
Yeah,
because a half-hour TV and music, it's so utilitarian.
Yeah, I tried to avoid that side of the business because it was just too boring. I wanted, I guess I had more to say, more to offer than just wallpaper.
So you build up this incredible career as orchestrating stuff, scoring stuff. Somehow you get involved with the extended Tales from the Crypt family.
Yeah,
Dick
that's
Donner,
all because that's all because of Michael Kamen.
Yeah,
I got a call from Sam Schwartz, the agent, composer's agent, and he said, go meet my client at midnight at Le Mondrian on Sunset. And I say, okay. So I'm sitting in the lobby of Le Mondrian, and in walks this apparition with long black hair, big beard, a cape, a black cape, all dressed in black with this huge turquoise belt buckle. And as he's like rushing he sees me, and he kind of cocks his head and looks to the side, and he calls my name. And I said, yeah. So I go up to his hotel room, and it's strewn with score pages and just a disaster. And on the side, I see toys, children's toys. And at the time, I had like a 4-year-old son that I was the sole caretaker of. And so I asked him, you have kids? And he says, yeah, I got 2 girls. Well, the next morning was the final session of the first Lethal Weapon movie. And so I went home and I wrote the yard fight, the end of the movie, for a 10 a.m. session the next day. And that's how I met Michael Kamen. I ended up doing 14 films over the years with Michael. And the Tales from the Crypt project came along where Michael was a supervising composer, and he hired me to do Bordello of Blood. And then Ed Shermer did Demon Knight prior to that.
Had you worked on, as part of just working for Michael, any other Crypt episodes?
No, I had never done anything Tales from the Crypt prior
Okay,
to that.
so if Bordello of Blood was your
Inaugural.
Oh boy.
Talking about Bordello, most of our podcasts, it talks about how dreadful the experience was of making that movie. And the best part of making that movie, from my perspective, was meeting and working with you and Michael.
Oh, well, thank you for that.
No, it was the best part of it. I mean, we had so much craziness going on and making the movie, cutting the movie, getting it ready for
we call our podcast How Not to Make a Movie, and that was every fucking day on that piece of shit.
And the only saving grace was when I met Michael and then met you and started working with you and Michael on the show. It was like, oh my God, this was the best thing that happened to me on this movie.
It was normal. Well, it was normal. It was civilized.
Well,
it wasn't crazy.
Michael was a force of nature and could be the most charming person you would ever meet in your life. So he never really, I never saw him rattled.
Yeah.
I never saw him uncomfortable. I was always amazed how he could stand on the podium and conduct somebody else's music and feel totally at home and comfortable with it and be able to float and chase and move whatever needed to be done. I owe a lot in my life to Michael. I'm grateful that I had the opportunity to know him and to work with him. And above all, we had so much fun. I mean, it was always laughs with Michael. So,
as you started to work with Chris on Bordello of Blood, Gil, you knew that the movie that you were putting on the table to go, oh God, please help us, it needed a lot of help. How did you approach Chris?
How did I approach Chris?
Yeah, how did you knowing what, because I you didn't feel great about the movie at that point. The cut was the cut, and
right.
We knew where it was deficient. It's not like, if we had made the movie we had intended to make, Dead Easy, this would have been a very different conversation. We would have been talking about supplementing emotions.
Yeah.
But Bordello of Blood, as we discussed in the podcast, there were no characters to work with. I mean,
right. And there was no emotional real integrity of what to do and convert that into musical. I think my first reaction when I first met Chris, and Chris, you may have a different memory of this, it was looking at you going, help.
That's vaguely familiar. Talk about working experience. I think I wrote the whole score in 3 weeks.
It's more time than it deserved.
Yeah, well, my wife loves the score, by the way. So I mean,
the score is
great.
wonderful. Oh my God!
Yeah, I love the score too.
Oh the score is sensational.
Well, thank you. I'll fish some more in a minute.
It's a very hard movie for either of us to watch, but because
think of me it's like being in the editing room watching the movie 12 hours a day, 14 hours a day.
Did you use any temp music, Gil, as you laid out the scenes?
I don't
recall that either. No,
I don't recall. If it was not sacrosanct. So
right.
No, I was just kind of curious, suddenly thinking back, what was there any of the temp track, if there was any, that, because that it kind of keys off certain, well, here's what I'm thinking about here, and here's what I kind of hope it to be, something like this here. It was because there was no emotion to play. We're really the music is going to supply all the emotional all the emotion
Yeah,
that's
I
there
mean,
because there was nothing in the writing.
well, that's like we talked about earlier, swimming in the deep end, it's
Yeah.
like just do the best you can and hope for the best. I wish I could remember what my motivation was, other than to say, like for example, at the end, the finale, when Lilith gets off. I just my whole intent was just to drive that scene to the end, just to give it enough energy to be able to keep it moving. So the other part that I think about it, the embalming scene was an attempt at a musical joke, because here's this guy doing this really depraved thing with dead bodies, and so I said, what would he be listening to if he had a radio on? So I wrote a little minuet.
Mhm.
It was pretty funny.
Oh, absolutely. But again, it is the perfect choice because you went away from the joke.
Yeah. Well, I did a lot of musical variety, so jokes and taglines are not foreign to me.
But in that instance, it's like Alec in A Clockwork Orange. He gets motivated to ultra violence by listening to Ludwig van.
Yeah, and then the brilliant thing about Clockwork Orange is when he is rehabilitated, you feel awful for him because it's not authentic to who he is. So yeah, the power of story is an amazing thing. It's an amazing thing.
You also did an episode of Tales from the Crypt, season 7.
I did,
yeah.
Thanks to Gil.
Well, that was thanks to you for making the movie, because when you talk about the ending of the movie and the score, all I can think of when I think of the movie is a black screen and the music. Because when I think of that ending, what we intended was not what we got. And
isn't that the way with a lot of filmmakers? Filmmakers don't end up making the movie or ending up with the movie that they wanted to make.
Yeah, and especially that scene was so. I mean, we had built. Alan and I had written a bigger mousetrap, and it was supposed to be quite substantial, and it just felt like it petered out to me, physically, and the energy. Yeah. Those fires were like silly little nothing. Anyway, thank God for you doing that score because that gave it some life.
I learned early on, Billy and I used to write in a little room off of his kitchen, and he had young kids like floating in and out, and we would write all night. And early on, my powers of concentration were not, I guess, fully developed. And so I'd get tired. There'd be a deadline at 6 o'clock in the morning, and I would just run out of gas. And so I learned, because the deadline was hours away, that I had to keep moving. I still had to put notes on paper, or else I was going to miss my deadline. I couldn't fall asleep. So I would go work on a different part of the song and then come back to the part that I was stumped on. That scene is something that I used to talk about in my film scoring class, in that I knew that it had to have energy. And there was a 30 seconds in the middle of it that I had no idea what to do with. I was completely stumped. And so I said, I came up with this lick in the strings where it starts on the G string, which is the lowest string of the violin. There's 4 strings. And so I do this whole lick, this whole bit on the G string. And so, well, shoot, if I have to fill 30 seconds, let's just play that same lick on the D string. And then let's play the same lick on the A string. And it just kind of keeps building through that thing just by the register increasing as the pitches go up. But I'll never forget that. It's like, oh my God, they're coming in the morning for these score pages, and I got to put something on the paper. What the crap do I do?
Nothing like deadlines.
Alan knows this. When we first did our first Tales from the Crypt that we wrote and I directed with Christopher Reeve, I always approached directing from a music point of view, and I would initially feel, okay, what's the music for this? That was my first gut reaction before I talked about a real character. What's thematically, what am I looking for? And with that one, it came to me that I was really interested in early Louis Armstrong, very early Louis Armstrong, like from the 20s, not from later on in his career, but early. And, from that, I was able to build creatively from a director, what the rhythm and what the feeling should be for the piece. When I got, and I did that with everything I ever directed, except Bordello. I was always looking for that. And I kept thinking, why can't I find that? And usually the actors would help me find it because I would get a sense of, the rhythm of how they speak and the rhythm of how they're approaching it. And from Bordello, I never got that reaction.
Yeah, well, God bless him with Dennis, doing one-liners from top to bottom. It's hard to create some continuity there.
Yeah.
You've orchestrated so many pieces, but you're taking someone else's composition and you're expanding upon it.
Well, in the early days, Billy's mantra to me was, if you can make it better, do it. And so, it was these dance rehearsal dance pianists. They would either give us complicated piano parts or lead sheets with a melody line with an instruction to say, go make it sound like XYZ. And so because Billy was so revered, nobody would ever question his judgment. And he very rarely missed the boat. But nonetheless, that gave him incredible latitude in terms of how and what he did to be able to solve the problem that the dancer or the choreographer had at that particular moment. Because there, it's not rocket science. If a dancer kicks, if there's a symbol on the kick, choreographer's happy, right?
Sure.
Everything leading up to that is up for grabs, right? They're not going to question that. As long as there's a symbol on the kick, they're going to be happy. Right. So if you think of it as kind of like a palette, the colors that you would choose to use is up for grabs, because not unlike film composing, arranging for dancers is very similar in the sense that choreographers, as with most, not all, but most directors, they're not musicians. They don't speak in a musical language. They speak in a different language altogether. So in terms of these, that was my training. So then as I got into orchestrating for movies, which basically is to make a living so I could support my son, and gig is a gig, and I'm a work for hire guy. So it's kind of whatever was needed at the time. And through the first 10 years of working elbow to elbow with Billy, I developed this almost perverse skill of writing for the orchestra, combined with the uniqueness of it was the ink would be drying on my hand as I walked into the session. So all these question marks, what do I do here? How is this going to work? Within hours, I would get that feedback, which nowadays you have to do it with machines, which is not the same as with a live orchestra. Yeah. It's a different animal altogether. But so that was the uniqueness of that experience. And so then I found it pretty easy to be able to float in and out of these different environments, because I built up that skill level.
Is there a particular score, particular orchestrations where you feel like, man, I nailed that one? Boy, did I get that one good.
Well, I'm a jazz musician, so I'm always looking to the next as opposed to looking back. But there are a couple that stand out. The Color Purple was a seminal moment, as was I orchestrated Silverado for Bruce Broughton, and I learned so much from working with Bruce. I mean, the guy is probably the most competent orchestrator I've ever known in my life, as well as being a brilliant composer. I mean, the guy really knows his stuff. And so I was able to gain that knowledge by working with him, in a hands-on situation.
Bruce said he scored a couple of Tales from the Crypt from us as well, the episodes.
Yeah.
He's
I love Bruce. He's a hilarious guy. The other one that Payback got a lot of attention because it was Mel. It was problematic to do. It was not an easy project.
Problematic how?
Oh, well, Brian made a very dark movie.
That's the movie's original director, Brian Helgeland.
And Paramount, this has been written about, so I'm not like speaking out of school. Paramount looked at it and says, Mel's the #1 box office star in the world. We can't release such a dark movie. And so Brian ended up leaving the project and Mel ended up finishing. So I was in the unenviable position of saying, because to his credit, Mel said, I don't want you to just cut the score that you've already recorded. I don't want you to do it the right way. So he hired me to adapt what I had written for Brian's cut for the final version. So I ended up doing it twice, which is okay. But that political dynamic made it really uncomfortable. It was not pleasant. The score that I always wanted to write and never had the opportunity to do so was a little independent film in 2006, 2007 called Local Color. It was written and directed by George Gallo. And that's probably closest to my personal artistic nature in terms of it's very melodic, it's wildly emotional, and it has the same sort of emotional component in that it's a talking heads movie. So a lot of the subtextual emotional element comes from the music. So those are the highlights. I mean, there's a lot to choose from. But,
good guy. It's a huge list, but that's why, and it's always hard to choose amongst your babies.
Yeah,
but some babies are better.
Well, it's I kind of look at it when I started making records. There's this, oh my God, it's got to be perfect, and I realize it's kind of like taking a photograph. That's where you happen to be at that moment. And, and some days are better than other days. That's just life.
It's like a poll. It's a snapshot of a moment in time. And really, it's a reflection of that and not necessarily anything else.
That's true. Very true.
Wishful Thinking was
Wishful Thinking.
Wow, what a terrific band. And Tim Weston on the guitar, your Tower of Power drummer Dave Garibaldi. You were on the keyboards. You had Jerry Watts on the bass and Dave Shank on vibes and percussion.
Right. That was that kind of, there was a trumpet player in town named Ollie Mitchell who was like the trumpet equivalent of the Wrecking Crew in the 60s. He was just like on every record, and he started a band called the Sunday Band that would play in Venice on Sunday afternoons. And so I started playing with that band because it was close to home and it was easy to do. And I really wasn't interested in, I'd gotten so big, I had to make a choice between continuing being a studio musician or being a writer, because I couldn't keep up my chops as a player and handle the workload of the arranging, and arranging paid more. And so I said, okay, well, let's put it. And Tim called and asked me if I wanted to be in this band, and so I became a co-founder of the group and ended up writing the bulk of the music for the band and performing. I mean, we worked at Lake Cafe in Sherman Oaks for $6 a night for 6 months before our first record came out. So
that's crazy.
Yeah, it is. It's, yeah.
What did you buy with all that money?
Yeah, right. We needed to have a musical outlet in the face of getting divorced and career and all the rest of that. And so that's, suited the bill. And they were great guys, and we spent a lot of time together. And so it was fun.
When's the reunion tour?
Oh, I don't think it's going to happen.
Damn, you're worse than the Beatles, you guys.
Yeah. Well, it's just, I ended up leaving the band, and because it was, I had gotten divorced. So here's like a wild little snapshot in history. 1986, Wishful Thinking was on the radio. It was on the airplay chart, jazz airplay charts for 6 months. I got an Academy Award nomination for The Color Purple, and I was winning Emmy Awards for my musical variety TV work. And I got divorced all in the same year. So I immediately became a single dad, and so wishful thinking was kind of a way for me to be engaged in making music in the midst of all of that insanity, right? So
I imagine it was a great thing to have in your pocket at any number of times, just to go out there and just to ride that wave.
It's, and the irony of, we talked about being multifaceted earlier, during the wishful thinking years, there were college musicians who were transcribing those records and playing my music, who had no clue that I was an arranger working with Julie Andrews at the same time. And the people in the TV industry had no idea I even played. They'd never even seen me play. So it was just like these multiple silos happening simultaneously.
Well, again, we discussed all the different careers you've had.
Well, there's one I'd like to bring up, looking forward and looking to the future. Recently, Chris and I have been talking, and we found out that we both have an interest in helping veterans. And Chris has been working on a project that I'd like him to describe a little bit.
Sure.
And maybe some people out there might be of interest
I appreciate
learning more about it, and who knows, maybe even writing a check.
Yeah,
it's something it's something that I think we all want to hear about, and could help us all. Well,
I'm in that space every day, so I'm happy to share. So after 9/11, the industry started to contract. I got interested in technology, and when I really started to get a grasp on social networking, as it was called then, I could see that my value was tied to the 20th century, and that there was a fuse lit and there was an end date somewhere off in the future. So I got interested in technology, and then we moved to Nashville. I was working for a friend's startup, doing all manner of things for him. And then out of the blue, I got an offer to teach at the University of Miami. And I ended up commuting from Nashville to Miami for 6 years. And at the end of this, my dean, and I was wildly successful in Miami at the University of Miami. So much so that I was too bright a bulb in the box for my boss. I was gaining too much attention, distracting people from him. So he decided he wanted to let me go. And in the midst of a separation negotiation, he erupted into narcissistic rage. And that so terrorized me that I ended up developing PTSD as a result. I mean, to give you some context into how devastating this was for me personally, guy was standing 3-4 feet away from me, and I'm convinced to this day that if he had a weapon, I could be dead. That's the level of intensity. Did a lot of study about narcissism and learned that there's no way to rationalize with a narcissist. The only thing you can do is walk away. Well, in my case, I had to work for this guy for another year to satisfy my contract. And I ended up developing PTSD, which is a whole other story. And when I left, I went through this whole deliberative process to figure out, what do I want to do with myself? You know, how do I want to spend my time? And I said, well, let's write something for the concert hall. I've never done that before. That sounds like an interesting challenge. And I was searching around for a theme to base this piece on. And there was a shooting at the Borderline Bar in Westlake, California, November 18th, 2018. 13 people died, 16 people were injured. And I immediately realized that I could use my musical storytelling skills that I had honed writing film music for decades to express the emotional lives of trauma and PTSD sufferers. From my own experience, the issue with PTSD and trauma is that it affects the hippocampus and memories that are stored in your brain, and because these are distorted memories, what ends up happening is when you are reminded of that experience, the brain thinks it's in the present moment as opposed to in the past. And this is why you see people going postal, and in this case in Westlake, it was a disturbed vet who ended up perpetrating this event. So that kind of launched me on this whole path of saying, well, how can I use music to be able to express to the rest of the world what trauma sufferers are actually feeling? And that's evolved into a project that I call The Missing Link. And it's called The Missing Link because I firmly believe that because we've lost the ability to listen to each other, that our ability to connect as human beings is under attack. You know, most people end up waiting to reply as opposed to actually listening to someone else. The concept behind this whole thing was, how can I use my skills to connect people in a meaningful way, to be able to generate heightened awareness, remove the stigma around mental illness, and help build communities. So The Missing Link is in 2 parts. I've created an hour-long concert event that is an original story that follows 2 families who have recently experienced a school shooting, and then the pandemic hits. And so these different characters go through this whole process, coming to realize that there is hope and there can be a positive life beyond this experience. They're not doomed to live in this hell of constantly reliving this experience. So there's a concert. This concert has 5 live actors on stage, a symphony orchestra, fully scored from top to bottom. It's about an hour long, and a visual component that is intended to be, instead of a linear film or a slideshow, I wanted to shoot it on a green screen with motion capture, so that the camera moves as opposed to being static in these different sets, these different scenes. So that the end result is, if you build it in Unity, it ends up looking like a video game, like a first-person shooter video game, to where you're actually moving in the environment, so that in essence creates an immersive event. Now, in the original thought process was, how do I drive people to the concert hall? Well, today's youth have grown accustomed to being in control of their media experience through their devices. So intending to leverage symphony orchestra's existing community engagement education networks, I could push out a program to schools that would encourage them to participate and be in control of that experience, and then give them the, gamify it to the extent that, audition and you get a chance to sing with the orchestra at the end of this show. The outreach program has kind of grown to where it exists as an online course in 4 modules that will show you how to use music, breathing, and movement to be able to provide alternative sensory data to the brain and actually change brain function, which will counteract the onset of anxiety and depression. This is now, it got picked up by a local nonprofit, a drug abuse nonprofit here in town. I'm talking with another state-funded agency in Tennessee about doing a pilot program and spreading it out across the entire state.
It's music therapy.
Well, no, not at all. Music therapy is about individual one-on-one, like a therapy session, right? Mm-hmm. Where the patient in music therapy is engaged in creating a piece of music to be able to express these hidden emotions.
Oh,
right?
sure. Okay.
Right.
Music as therapeutic.
Yes. And there's there's a huge trend of music being prescribed in a healthcare setting as a therapeutic. So this is what the healthcare industry would call an intervention, and it's not a healthcare treatment. It's a coping skill designed for teenagers to have something available 24/7 that they can personalize to their own tastes to make it relevant to their experience, to ensure engagement, and give these teenagers and their parents the hope that there's a way to be able to deal with this. I'm getting into my whole soapbox here, but it's so important. It needs to be said. 25% of Americans suffer from mental illness. That's 66 million people. 20% of teenagers have had a major mental illness event. Suicide is the second leading cause of death of teenagers. Hundreds of teenagers who are suicidal end up in the ER every night because they have no place to go. There is the demand for therapeutic assistance and treatment far exceeds the capability of the healthcare industry to service. So you not only are the teenagers lost with no place to go, their parents are having the same issues at the same time. And on top of that, 40% of the time, 4 out of 10 people who go to therapy, the therapy doesn't work. 4 out of 10 times they go to a psychiatrist and get a pill. It doesn't work. 40% of the time. So not only do you, if you're suicidal and you say, I need help today, you have to wait months to get seen by a therapist. There's 4 out of 10 times it's not going to work.
Yes. So, speaking from experience, now I got lucky. I had a good therapist, and I got lucky with medication, the right one, but it's a long story unto itself. But music, I use music now in a therapeutic way that I did not use then. And I know for a fact that, and again, I'm coming from a much healthier mental place than I did back when I was in crisis, but I can attest to the value of music as
it's crazy. Yeah, it's the secret sauce to this is to, okay, we'll get into the whole 9 yards here. there's a term called entrainment. And entrainment is two objects that are vibrating, especially in the brain, will try to match the same frequency. And it's the brain's way of making itself efficient. I don't have to fight do two different things at the same time. If I'm vibrating at the same frequency, then I don't have to work as hard. The brain doesn't have to work as hard. This means that, now this is something I've known anecdotally for years, but now there's science to support it. This issue of entrainment means that your body will react physiologically to tempo. So if you're listening to a slow piece of music, your brain will try to match that tempo to become more efficient in its process, which then controls your heart rate and your respiration, which has a huge impact on anxiety and depression. Right.
Indeed.
So the secret sauce of this thing is if you listen to a piece of music with a tempo at a pulse at a specific frequency that's going to calm your heart rate, it doesn't matter what genre of music you're listening to. It's just the tempo is the most important aspect of it. Conversely, if you want to get up and move, you listen, why is disco music 128 beats per minute? Is because your brain is going to want to match that tempo, and it's going to encourage and support that kind of activity. So knowing that information, I realized that if you take a piece of music that's going to trigger a positive memory, situation, experience, whatever it is, that fits within a specific tempo range, what happens in the brain is the hippocampus will trigger that memory, say, oh, I feel great, and all the hormones, the dopamine and the serotonin will get released, and you're going to feel better just simply by listening to that music and having it trigger a positive memory. You add that to this tempo range issue, and then the third part of it is movement. I read an amazing book called Chatter by a research psychologist who did a study about how to combat self-talk or rumination.
How to combat rumination.
Yeah. Yeah. You get lost. You just get lost in this merry-go-round, and you can't stop your brain, and you're just going crazy. Mm-hmm. Well, one of the aspects that he talks about is doing a pre-shot routine, like an athlete. An athlete will do a specific behavior before they have to perform to focus their attention. Combining a pre-shot routine with this breathing in sync with the tempo of the music, with music that triggers a positive memory, is what this whole thing is all about. So at present, it's in beta, and I've got 2 different offers to do joint studies to prove efficacy. In the first of the year, it looks like we're going to be heading off into a pilot program, and it just keeps going. So that's my passion project.
I would be happy to be a test subject.
Yes.
I asked you to describe this to us so that viewers on our podcast can really benefit from it. We've talked a little bit how it could also help veterans.
Yes, anybody who has subject to trauma. And
it sort of goes to the point where I'm always amazed that, when we start our careers, we're thinking, oh, I want to write for a band, or I want to do orchestrations, or I want to do scores for movies, or we want to write, we want to direct, we want to produce. And you've gone into a whole other area that you probably never even thought you'd go even close to go. And we have gone into that same area with supporting and helping veterans. And so if anyone's out there who'd like to help us or help you, Chris, and help, figure this out and financially, or have an idea of how to get this across, please feel free to contact us or Chris directly and see if we can make this further this along.
I appreciate that. And my goal here is, when I started this, I started as a nonprofit, and then I realized I knew jack about nonprofit world. And I was a little late in the game. I didn't have the runway to come up to speed on how to raise money in a nonprofit. So I chose to make this a for-profit entity strictly because I could get to market faster and help more people.
Yeah.
And I'm very, very flexible in terms of how this can be parsed or is basically an idea that has a lot of tentacles to it. And so what keeps me going on a day-to-day basis is I'm here to help people. You know, I'm grateful for living a life that few can imagine. And so my time spent now is how do I make an impact and help people, help the world, as opposed to saying, well, I want another notch on my gun belt, you know.
Right.
You also do a great deal of mentoring.
I do. Well, I'm a teacher at heart. I don't do as much mentoring as I have in the past. I enjoy teaching a lot. I enjoyed my students. They were all bright and engaged, and I'm still in contact with a number of them years after the fact. I'm not a fan of academia per se, but that's a whole other conversation.
But mentoring takes all kinds of other forms.
Sure.
You know,
Sure.
These are about relationships and encouraging other creative people to create however they have to.
You know, like I say, if you walk into being a creative person with self-imposed boundaries, as opposed to, and then you believe that anything is possible, you have to have lanes. You have to focus your attention. But nothing is, you know, when I was a teenager, people would look at me and say, oh, I want to write music for movies. I said, oh, yeah, kid, go away. It'll never happen. So if I can inspire people by supporting them and saying, in following their dreams, I'm all for it. Because, you know, at the end of the day, things work or they don't work. And something that I remind myself constantly, something that Quincy said years ago, and I'll paraphrase because I never get it exactly right. My self-worth is not dependent upon your justification of me. And that's such a powerful statement, because what it essentially says is that I am a whole person outside of what I do. So
we'd all be better off if we could listen to that ourselves.
Oh, you bet. Yeah, you bet.
Internalizing it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a challenge. It takes a lot of work. Right?
Oh yeah.
Oh, indeed.
But from the mentoring point of view is you say, I want to go do this. Well, you go do it, and it either works or it doesn't. And if you are saddled with the notion of failure as being a judgmental or affecting your self-worth, then you're going to have a negative reaction to it, as opposed to saying, well, I'm a whole person, but that for whatever reason, that just didn't work. Let's either figure out why it didn't work, or let it go and go off and do something else. Then you live a life of moving forward, as opposed to being trapped by the indecision and the insecurity.
You can also learn the important lesson that failure is that's where you learn all the important stuff.
You bet.
Success teaches you nothing other than the fact that your shit doesn't stink, and you're wrong about that. It absolutely does stink. I am grateful for all the failure, because that's everything I know comes from having failed.
Yeah, and you can't fail unless you try. Right. So as you separate that self-worth issue from the judgment of failure or success,
it's
then
the learning curve. That's all that it is.
Yeah.
I may be the happiest I've ever been in my life, because I'm free from the judgment of Hollywood. I'm free from the judgment of other people. I'm free from the work for hire life, trying to solve somebody else's problem that has no relationship to me as an individual. Right.
Absolutely.
You know, and it's a crazy place to be, but man, you know, my goal is to make the most of it, and if I can share that concept with people from a teaching or a mentorship point of view, well then, man, you know, I've done a good thing. I can end this life and feeling like I've accomplished something.
You have done more than a few good things. You have accomplished a shit ton.
Well, we certainly
Thank-
went a far afield from talking about composing for television and movies.
Well, that was it's kind of reminds me of a story, Gil, about TOTO hired Miles Davis to come play on one of their records. And Jeff Porcaro and David Paich are in the booth, and Miles walks in, and Miles is an enigma. I mean, he's not the happiest of, or the most gracious of people, put it that way.
The most gracious of enigmas.
Yes. So he walks in, and he starts to play, and he plays all of this atonal stuff. And Jeff and David are looking at each other. Oh my God, what are we going to do? How do we tell Miles it sucks? And so Miles walks in the booth, and he reads the room, and he says, "Oh, you want me to play the old shit?" So it's kind of like where I'm at in my life now is about this project, pushing this project forward. All that Hollywood stuff is in the past somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Well, listen, we should let you go. We should continue this maybe another time.
Sure.
Further.
Sure.
And thanks so much for joining us and being part of our show. We really appreciate it.
Well, I'm always available.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in. We'll see you next time. The How Not to Make a Movie podcast is executive produced by me, Alan Katz, by Gil Adler, and by Jason Stein. Our artwork was done by the amazing Jody Webster, and Jason Jody, along with Mando, are all the hosts of the fun and informative Dads from the Crypt podcast. Follow them for what my old pal the Crypt Keeper would have called terrific crypt content.